It would be foolish to say today is the moment it all began. Ukraine announces application for expedited NATO membership. It'd be foolish to say that this was the moment the war started because the West and NATO are already involved in this war. But this, my friends, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, filing for fast-tracked NATO membership, it is a marker in history, a substantial moment. For today marks the day if NATO says yes, World War III has formally begun. Article 5 of NATO states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. Admitting a nation at war into NATO is to declare war on the enemies of that nation. And that's where we are. Volodymyr Zelensky, they've already applied and are being welcomed into the EU. And now they seek to enter the military membership of NATO. This is them formally requesting every NATO nation declare war on Russia and join them in their fight. But my friends, it doesn't end here. In a speech, Vladimir Putin, I don't think he even mentioned Ukraine. He said the U.S. has set the precedent for the use of nuclear weapons. And what we are seeing is Satanist, expansionist, hypocrisy. Vladimir Putin basically said he will lead a resistance against the satanic West. And you know what? A lot of people agree with him. This speech was powerful. I'm not saying it was good for us in the West, but it was a powerful speech in which Vladimir Putin basically condemned the West, speaking very little of Ukraine. This was effectively his announcement to the world to join him. And this could be the start of World War III. Whether Ukraine is formally admitted, Vladimir Putin has made his position clear. China is already conducting military drills with Russia, Belarus, and several other countries. And of course, there are many adversaries to the United States. So will this be it? Will it lead to nuclear war? I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is yes, and I think you'd be stupid to think otherwise. Not that it's guaranteed, but that Vladimir Putin clearly is not backing down here. Ukraine applying for NATO membership is beyond a provocation. It is everything Russia said not to do when it said it would negotiate for peace. But Russia is now formally annexing 4 territories, some that it doesn't even control. And under this, it will claim it has every right to use any and all means to secure these territories. It would be foolish of the West and NATO to believe that Vladimir Putin would not use nuclear weapons. It would be stupid. Because they're tactical and there are low-yield weapons. Interestingly, we have a funny quote that it made me laugh. This guy, we'll pull it up in a second. He said, only a madman would sacrifice Boston for Poznan. Yeah, in Poland. If Vladimir Putin was to use nuclear weapons on a NATO member state, like Poland, for instance, I'm not convinced that the U.S. would retaliate with a nuclear strike. Because why would we sacrifice our cities for small cities in Europe? No, it would be strategic, it would be tactical, but it would be devastating. And what we are marching to right now with today, this is the moment. Typically, I like to say, how many grains of sand make a heap? And everything we've seen since the start of this year, and actually going back several years, suggests we're knocking at the door of World War III. But today is something different. Applying for NATO membership is a boulder slammed into that pile of sand. Sorry, we're not looking at a heap anymore. Something tremendous has just rolled on in, and we have a bigger issue to deal with. Direct involvement of the United States into a war that we did not vote for, that we did not agree upon, that Congress did not declare because of NATO. Unless a single NATO state says no. But it's looking like we may be entering World War III. Let's read the news. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member in order to support our work as a member. You'll get access to our exclusive, uncensored, members-only shows for the Timcast IRL podcast, Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Whole lot of fun, spicy conversations. Those are all up now in a massive library going back almost 2 years now. All available for you when you become a member. But as a member, you are supporting our journalists who report the news all day, every day, and are working hard behind the scenes and even on the ground to bring you the true facts and to cut through all the BS. We got a bunch of other shows, Cast Castle, Tales from the Inverted World, so there's more to get from your membership, and we got more coming soon. I want to say just thank you all so much for being members. You really have helped make all of this possible. So don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and be the notification. We're very close to a midterm election. How convenient for a president and a political party in control that a war would come, because typically people are scared to vote for change during war. We're being censored. If you want to combat the censorship, be the notification and share this video. From timcast.com. Zelensky's remarks were made in a video address on Friday after Russian President Vladimir Putin signed treaties to annex parts of Ukraine. Putin spoke during a ceremony at St. George's Hall to celebrate the annexed regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. During the speech, he claimed the West is trying to turn Russia into a colony and crowds of slaves. History has called us to a battlefield to fight for our people, for the grand historic Russia, for future generations, Putin said. The U.S. and EU have said they will not recognize the annexed territory as part of Russia. Moscow said that they will defend the territories by all available means. Shortly after the speech, Zelensky's video was released. We are taking our decisive step by signing Ukraine's application for accelerated accession into NATO, Zelensky said in the video. De facto, we have already proven compatibility with alliance standards. They are real for Ukraine, real on the battlefield, and in all aspects of our interaction. We trust each other, we help each other, and we protect each other. This is the alliance. Let me make this absolutely clear for all of you. World War III. The application to join NATO is not that they want to assist us. It's that they want us to assist them. They are at war right now and only capable because NATO, the United States and others, have been supplying them with weapons and intelligence and cold hard cash. This now is them saying, we want you as nations and an alliance to directly intervene on our behalf. We are not admitting them. They are asking us to engage in World War III directly. We can say no. The reality is, we already said yes. Whether or not they are in NATO, we are already engaged in this conflict. Quote, we are ready for a dialogue with Russia, but with another president of Russia, Zelensky said. In order for Ukraine's membership to be approved, all 30 NATO allies must agree to allow it. Euronews noted that NATO's Article 5 defense clause, the pledge that all allies must come to the aid of any ally whose territory is under threat, would be compromised in the case of Ukraine, as it is unclear what parts of the country would join. NATO has historically been against allowing nations to join if they do not have clearly defined borders and are in the midst of conflict. But where will we go? War. We're in it. We're in it. The only thing we're seeing here is a formality. We've already been involved. This would mark a serious change, and I think the West wants it. Putin says U.S. created nuclear precedent by bombing Japan and vows to smash the satanic West. Rants that America is still occupying Germany. Anglo-Saxons blew up Nord Stream and warns he'll use all forces to defend annexed Ukraine regions. Max Seddon, probably pronouncing his name wrong, Sedan, Moscow bureau chief at the Financial Times. In Soviet Russia, news reports you. Ah, yes. Was that Yakov Smirnov who made those jokes? He has a thread from several hours ago outlining key points of Putin's speech. And I think you should hear this. It starts. Putin begins his speech. He starts talking about the votes to join Russia in Russia-controlled parts of Ukraine. Quote, the people have made their choice. This is the will of millions. Thus follows what was called thunderous applause in the USSR. Putin says southeastern Ukraine is actually part of Russia because the Russian state's predecessors ruled it. It was a part of the Russian Empire, and because the USSR fought to free it from the Nazis in World War II. Putin holds a moment of silence for the separatist commanders and Russian soldiers killed over the years fighting Ukraine in the Donbass. Putin starts a historical rant about the collapse of the USSR in 1991. He says, this was a catastrophe because the Soviet leaders destroyed our great country and just left the people to deal with it. Putin says people in southeastern Ukraine now are going to live in their true historical fatherland. Quote, I want the Kyiv government and their real bosses in the West to hear me. Residents of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson are becoming our citizens forever. Putin calls on Ukraine to stop fighting and negotiate an end to the war with Russia, but these territories are off limits. We will defend our lands with all the means at our disposal and do everything to protect our people. This is our great liberating mission. Now, many people have compared Vladimir Putin to Hitler, and I want to point out there are some similarities here, notably the Sudetenlands. Hitler had repeatedly claimed that many other areas in Europe were historically German and that the German lands should be reunited with ancestral Germany. Thus was his justification in many instances for annexation and war. And what we saw was an attempt to placate, saying fine. But Hitler didn't stop and eventually invaded Poland outright. Putin calls on Ukraine to stop the fighting. Quote, the West is looking for new ways to strike against our country, to weaken and destroy Russia. They just can't put up with there being such a big country with its territory, rich natural resources, and people who won't live on anyone else's rules. Putin says the West wants to make Russia a colony, rob it, and turn its people into a crowd of voiceless slaves. They don't need Russia, but we do. Applause. Russia will always be Russia. We will always defend ourselves and our motherland. Putin, on the rules-based order in the West, quote, has anyone seen these rules who agreed to them? He says the Western elite is colonial and racist because they are spreading Russophobia all over the world. Even by Putin's standards, this is really a blistering broadside against the West. He's drawing a line between the colonial Western elite and everyone else, going on about the Opium Wars and the Indian Mutiny. The message: Russia wants to lead a global resistance to the West. Quote, the West has said for centuries, it is bringing freedom and democracy to the world. Everything is exactly the opposite. He goes on about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Allied bombings of German cities, the Korean and Vietnam Wars. In case you had any doubt what this is really about, Putin hasn't even mentioned Ukraine for about 15 minutes now. This is effectively an official declaration of hostilities against the West. Putin says the Anglo-Saxons are behind the sabotage of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines this week. Then he pivots to ranting about NATO and other U.S.-led alliances like the AUKUS, or the AUKUS, I think, AUKUS. AUKUS? He says U.S. military doctrine is total domination of the whole world. We hear about the containment of Russia, China, and Iran. Other countries are next from the Middle East and Latin America. He says the sanctions blitzkrieg against Russia failed to topple it. And non-Western countries agree with him that U.S. hegemony has gone too far. You can't feed people with paper dollars and euros. You can't heat people's homes with the lies you spread on social media. You can't warm people with puffed up valuations. You need energy sources. Max says, I've watched a lot of Putin's speeches over the last 10 to 15 years, and this is the most anti-U.S. one by a really long way. If I were a Western policymaker wondering if he'd really use nuclear weapons, and he hasn't even got to them yet, I'd be very concerned. The only people who are ready to live according to U.S. rules are political masochists and other followers of non-traditional political relations. A homophobic joke. Putin rants about sex change operations. This is unacceptable. We have our own future. Quote, outright Satanism in the West, though Putin disappointingly did not expand on this. Putin says Russia wants to lead an anti-colonial movement to liberate the world. We need to turn this disgraceful page. Western hegemony will be smashed. This is inevitable. We must do this for our people, the great historical Russia. Putin bingo. Ivan Ilyin, is that what he's saying? If I'm Russian, it means I love in Russian. Truth is on our side. Russia is with us. A standing ovation. That was a truly stunning speech, one clearly aimed at sending fear into the hearts of the US, UK, and European leaders. Here comes the actual annexation part. After the national anthem plays, Putin and the four leaders, in quotes, of the occupied Ukrainian territories chant Russia, Russia. Putin still hasn't clarified how much territory Russia is actually claiming. Russia's already being pushed back in Donetsk and Luhansk, which Putin has vowed to liberate in full. It doesn't control all of Kherson and Zaporizhia either, but hasn't said what to do with them. One thing Putin didn't explicitly mention in the speech, Russia's nuclear weapons. He said Russia would use all the means at our disposal to defend its annexed territories, but never directly talked about its own willingness to use nukes. Alexander Dugin, quote, This is a fundamental declaration of war against the modern West and modern world in general. This is a manifesto of tradition. I can't imagine how profound the consequences are. It was an eschatological religious speech. Probably announcing that wrong. Yeah. I think that there is what you truly need to get out of this. It's not about Ukraine. It's about something else. It's about war between the East and West, China, Russia. Who really blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? We're told the official narrative is that Russia blew up its own pipelines and not say enemies of Russia. I wonder why. The Baltic pipeline's right there. It intersects with Nord Stream. Why wouldn't they blow up the Baltic pipeline? I wonder why. From Newsweek. Jason Fields, the deputy opinion editor, writes, Volodymyr Zelensky has the worst idea ever. And he goes on to make points, many points that I've already made. Good points. If NATO went along with it, a war would start like none we've ever seen. Endless troops, streams of tanks, a sky blotted out by warplanes. And he says, that's why it's a bad idea. But he points out, interestingly, Nord Stream 1 is a key natural gas, blah, blah, blah. Now someone has blown a big hole in the pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. It's possible to look, but the issue is we're already in the war. That's the point. It's easy to understand Zelensky's request. Russia is officially annexing large chunks of its country. So where does it leave NATO? Every which way allowing Ukraine to join is insanity. The problem? We're already in this war. He's right. This is a formality, my friends. If you are just now seeing this and wondering what's going on with the trend on Twitter, World War III, or the admittance of Ukraine into NATO, you're late to the party. We are already here, ladies and gentlemen. War doesn't just start with a bullet being fired from a gun. CNBC. The U.S. responded to Putin's illegal annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions with new sanctions against Russian citizens and organizations. President Zelensky also today signed papers to accelerate Ukraine's application for NATO membership. That right there outlines we are in World War III. Samuel Romani. Breaking. The U.S. imposes sanctions on companies from Belarus, Armenia, and China for supporting the Russian military. Defense procurement from Radioavtomatika is being targeted by U.S. sanctions. China's Sino Electronics and Armenia's Taco LLC were suppliers to this Russian company. Well, there you go, baby. Does it end here? No. There's more. From the New York Times. Pentagon plans to set up a new command to arm Ukraine, officials say. The mission in Germany would streamline a training and assistance system that the U.S. and its allies created on the fly after Russia's invasion. I can't tell you who's right or who's wrong. I can tell you that I, as an American citizen, have more interest alignment with the West and NATO than I do with Russia. But I can certainly understand Russia's got reasons for their grievances. This is the problem with war. The machine wants you to believe in a one-dimensional conflict. They want you to believe that we are the noble crusaders of peace and Vladimir Putin is an evil despot. It is never the case. Competing interests is all we have. In the West, we want Europe to get cheaper gas. It's impossible, apparently. It's very difficult for us, I should say. Because Turkey, Syria, Russia, we need to be able to build pipelines through these areas. We can't. Now, interestingly, Libya collapsed. Yeah. So there's opportunity through northern Africa. But Vladimir Putin and its allies wouldn't allow us to build. And they wouldn't allow the United States and NATO to admit Ukraine. So war breaks out. That's it. The West won't stop. Why would they? Ideologically opposed to Russia. Russia won't stop. Ideologically opposed to us. You can only, choose who you want to believe in war. I think the safest bet is always to root for the United States and hope that we within the U.S. in the upcoming election can do something to guide it in the right direction. We live here. We eat here. We work here. We benefit from what the U.S. benefits from. But I don't stand for the lies, and I do not stand for the war. A nuclear war would be devastating to everyone, and that's why I wonder, is this really worth it? The Guardian reported on the 27th, nuclear attack in Ukraine should spark devastating NATO response, says Poland. Zbigniew Rau rules out a nuclear reprisal, but says the alliance is sending a clear message to Russia. Vladimir Putin made a veiled threat again. He said the U.S. set the precedent for the use of nuclear weapons with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that was a long time ago, my friends. The power of those bombs, nothing compared to what we have today. And those were gravity bombs. Rudimentary at best. A plane flew over the cities and dropped it. And that was it. And the impact made an explosion. Today, we have air burst. I believe it was impact detonation, ground detonation. Now we have air bursts, ICBMs, the Poseidon nuclear torpedo, nuclear artillery. We're not just talking about Vladimir Putin firing an ICBM. He could launch nuclear shells with 10 to 15 times the yield of standard shells. Massive. What we would see from that would be, I don't know. It would be terrifying. Good times make weak men make hard times. Because we could not get a functioning government to just say enough. So what do we have? NATO hasn't stopped expanding. They don't act like the Soviet Union is gone. They act like it's still there. Russia won't stand for this expansion. War is inevitable. If you could make a bet on it, I would. I have an interesting tweet here. Another one from Samuel Romani. He says, Sergei Karaganov says that he is 99% sure that the U.S. will not retaliate if Russia launched a nuclear strike on a NATO country that supports Ukraine. Karaganov's scenario appears to be in relation to Poland, as he says it would take a madman in the White House who hates America to sacrifice Boston for Poznan. Karaganov has made similar claims in the past about Article 5 of NATO having little practical value. It's a really good point. By retaliation, he is referring explicitly to a nuclear strike back. Poland has said that NATO will respond conventionally to a nuclear strike from Russia on Ukraine, but a strike on NATO territory would presumably allow for a nuclear response from the U.S. Poznań in Poland. It's a town of, I believe, was it 500,000? 529,000 people live in Poznań. Why would the U.S. risk cities of millions for cities of hundred thousands? I don't know. Poznań County and several other communities is inhabited by over 1.1 million people. The right nuclear device would kill all million of those people. The U.S. could retaliate as part of Article 5, use every means necessary. But this would mean that Russia then responds by hitting U.S. cities. I do not believe it would happen. I don't. I think we're helpless. I think the reality is whoever fires the nuke first wins. That's it. If Putin were to fire a nuke on Poznan, wiping out hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1 million people, many countries in the world may line up and say, we're going to war with you. But it depends on the pretext. It depends on the context. How many countries would line up behind Russia? And when that happens, how many of them will say, fire the nukes? I hope everybody understands. Nuclear war may be inevitable, unfortunately. The scenario I often want to give to people is this. Imagine you're in the middle of the woods. You're lost. No civilization in sight. It's been several days. You've killed some rabbits, some small rodents and squirrels or whatever. You've eaten a little bit. And you have some food in a little food pouch. And you have some water in a canteen. But you know you must find food or die. And soon. Shelter. Off in the distance, you see another individual. You're both carrying rifles. You can see he's carrying a rifle and so are you. You can't really tell exactly what kind, but it looks like it may be similar to yours. Maybe it's select fire. Maybe he has more ammo. You don't know. He's carrying a canteen and he has food. What do? You don't know this person. You are lost. You're hungry. In your country, most people would probably just shout out, hey, I'm lost, looking for help. And the good news is that person may say, how's it going? My name's Jim. Let's link up. And then you're less guarded. You come up, you might talk. Sounds good. You're from the same place. You probably share a language and share values. But let's erase all that. Let's talk about disparate nations. You are now lost in the woods, bordering a country where fairly hostile relations. You don't know where the border is. You don't know if you're on it, past it, or on your side. You see a man. You're lost and you're hungry and you don't know what to do. And so you yell out, hey, I'm lost, need some help. You put your hands up. The guy shouts back, blah, 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 puts up his hands. What did he say? You don't know. What do you do? Serious question. What do you do? Comment. Let me know what you think. There are a lot of ways it could play out. 1,000,001 scenarios. Imagining the scenario is designed to help you understand the conflict of nations. Granted, they scale up. It's very different. But now you're in a position where you can say, do I trust this person? I don't know what they're saying. So what do? Do you keep your weapon at low ready? Here's what happens. Let's say your first instinct is to put your hand at your hip at your sidearm and put your hand up, signifying you don't want to fight. But now the man sees you putting your hand near your gun. So he grabs this and holds it down. Hey, no, 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 and he yells. Or he wouldn't say no, he would go, ba, 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 blah, 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 blah. You have no idea what he's saying. Now he may be giving you instructions. In fact, he may be saying, stop it, drop it, get on the ground, drop your weapon. You don't know. What if he's a bad guy? What if he wants your food? You need food too. If you don't get food, you're going to die. Do you trust him that he'll help you? What if he takes your food from you? Now you're dead faster. He pulls out his weapon. When he does, you draw yours. He sees you pull your weapon. He raises his. Bang, bang, bang. Now you're shooting at each other. It is not so easy to understand how these things will play out. And maybe that's a worst case scenario. Maybe you walk up with your hands up and you say, I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight. Who knows how it plays out? You want to be a good person. You want to have the best. You want to believe in the best of humanity. But the reality is you put your hands up, you lower your weapons and say, no fight, no fight. And the guy walks up with his gun out and says, okay, pop, pop, takes your food and water and carries on now with 2 guns. Pessimistic. I don't want to believe it. I want to believe that most people would help each other. But you take a look now at the U.S. and Russia, and we add another circumstance into the mix. It's not just that your nations are at odds with each other. It's that you've heard and this man, they eat people. That's right. And you oppose the eating of people. So what do? When you encounter them in the wilderness, fighting is the only thing that's going to happen. You're going to avoid each other or you're going to fight each other. Russia does not like us. It's not just that they met a stranger in the woods. It's that they know all about us. They see a person in the distance and they say, I know all about you. I've heard the stories and you're not going to help me. And the West says the same to Russia. I've heard the stories about you. And now you've approached each other. How could anything but fighting happen? We can agree to stand back and avoid each other, but eventually the conflict comes to a clash. And I feel like that's where we are. We are at the point with the application to join NATO where Russia knows what this means. The annexation of these 4 territories. In response, Zelensky says, okay, then we'll join NATO, formally putting those territories in NATO's sphere of influence. There you go. Disputed territories in active war. It takes only one NATO nation to say no, it's my understanding, to veto their membership. I think that's probably likely. But maybe not. If NATO wants war, why wouldn't it get war? We're already hearing that they're blaming Russia for bombing their own pipeline and will retaliate if it escalates. I think NATO wants war with Russia. I think Russia knows it. And Russia's vowed to use nuclear weapons if they face an existential threat, which Vladimir Putin has just clearly pointed out they do. He said the West wants to make us a colony, slaves with no voice, sounds to me like an existential threat to Russia. The criteria by which Russia said they would use nuclear weapons. So what do you do? I don't have all the answers for you, my friends, but I can tell you stay away from cities. Get out of cities while you still can. Find a way. Buy some emergency food. Store some emergency water. And be prepared. A World War III may already be here. That's what the Pope said. We may be living through it. And right now, as World War III, or whatever you want to call it, commences in Ukraine, seemingly we are clueless. You know, many people just mind their own business. Watch TV. Entertainment and say, don't know, don't care. Those people are going to be the worst off. Because when the disaster comes, they'll have nothing. And chance favors the prepared. For those of us that pay attention, perhaps it is dark. Perhaps you may feel it's a bit pessimistic. I think it's a bit realistic. I think watching this show is good for you. I think talking about this is important. When you learn about this stuff, you don't need to wallow in fear or self-pity or panic. You can simply say, I've heard. And what do you do then? You get some supplies. You figure out what makes the most sense, and you judge for yourself. Perhaps this will be more serious than we realize. Perhaps it won't be. But at the very least, when it all comes crashing down, you won't be in a city. You'll have some emergency food supplies, and you'll survive. And in the event that nothing happens, and the war fizzles out, and Russia backs down, your worst case scenario is you'll be breathing cleaner air, and the food you bought for emergencies, you can just eat it. Or you can sit in a city, ignore the world, play your video games, and then when it all comes crashing down, you'll be in panic, frantic, and starving. Make your choice. Hopefully it does not get as bad as we think it is, but I see no signs of de-escalation. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all then.